Welcome to the Startup Field Guide, where we learn from successful founders of unicorn startups how their companies truly found product market fit. I'm your host, Sandhya Hegde, and today we'll be diving into the story of Instabase. Started in 2015, Instabase is a new entrant in the space of enterprise document processing and automation. Last valued at $2 billion. It uses several different AI techniques, NLP, OCR, computer vision, and now generative AI, to extract unstructured data from documents like pay stubs, tax forms, ID cards, and make them really easily usable for massive organizations. They also help their customers, in financial services, consumer goods, etc., to build applications that can automate workflows using this data. Over 50 large enterprises, mostly Fortune 100, use Instabase today. And we have with us the CEO and co-founder of the company, Anant Bharadwaj. Anant, welcome to the Startup Field Guide.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So Anant, I want to kind of go back to the origin story. I believe you moved to the Bay Area in 2010 from Pune in India for a master's at Stanford in computer science. I'm really curious what your experience was like, making that transition and, how it has maybe informed what you're doing today.
So I think I took a job in India after finishing my undergrad, and that was time I think when a lot of cool companies that were coming from Silicon Valley, so Facebook and Google. And if you read about the founders of several of those companies that came from Stanford, and Stanford was called sort of like the startup hub. I had no hope of getting admission there, but I still applied. So I applied to a number of schools, and including Stanford for doing masters, and with the hope that like I always had this ambition of starting a company, and I felt that maybe going to Stanford is one way of doing it, without knowing like how it all is going to work out.
Right.
And I think in general, Stanford claims that they don't make mistakes. That year they did because my academics wasn't good. They gave me admission, and and I was surprised because I got rejected from a number of other schools, their peer schools. So
Clearly, they knew something about you that was to them already worth the risk.
so Stanford, I got admission, and I got admission into their master's program, which is
Right.
their MSCS. And I moved. No, I moved to the U.S., and this was my first time in the U.S. I'd never left India before, and and I think like these the courses they were okay. Like we studied the classes in Indian undergrad schools, so database class or the operating system class. Those were not that difficult. I mean, in general, I knew those basic concepts. So when I took the classes, I mean, those were fine. In general, I think there were different kind of focus here, more practical
Right.
sort of applications. So, for example, homework would not be like explain how underlying architecture of something works, but more about here is the application you want to build. What are the trade-offs you need to consider and build an application and prove that with running some code. And I like that aspect. At the same time, I think this was a big culture shift in the
Mm.
sense that the way I saw things working in India, and I did spend a lot of time making sure that I do well in those classes. And retroactively, I don't think those classes matter that much. So I didn't do
Right.
much at Stanford really. Like I actually spent most of the time doing well in classes, and rest of the time finding RA so that it can pay money for the tuition because Stanford is a very very expensive school. Um, and the reality is, I did not do a lot of research. I found a professor, Scott Clemmer, who was doing human computer interaction, and I liked his research a lot. And then I took a number of independent studies so that I could do some research. But generally, most of my time was spent in just taking classes.
And then you spent years at MIT. I'm curious, what was kind of the switch for you? Like, when did you decide you really want to start a company? What was the founding insight and kind of exposure to entrepreneurship you had at the time?
Yeah, so when I graduated from Stanford, it felt like a lost opportunity because I wanted to start a company, and I spent like last 2 years literally taking classes, right? So I definitely had learned a few things, but not a lot compared to what I already knew when I was in India. Although I made some really good friends, and Stanford classes are much more sort of intense, and I took some classes that I would not have been able to take in India. But still,
Right.
in general, I think I felt this this was a lost opportunity because I came here to start a company, and what I have is a master's degree and maybe a job offer from Google. And so I interned at Oracle and then at Google. And the choice was I go back to one of these big companies, which I did not want to. And I really did not know like what to do. So somebody, I think had jokingly said, if you really don't know what you want to do, go do a PhD, because that's a
Right.
really, really fail-safe environment to try different things, and gives you some time to figure things out. And that comment kind of like echoed, which is like if you don't know what you really want to do in your life, just a PhD, just like like and PhD doesn't kick you out in 2 years, right? You can spend a long period of time. Surprisingly, I think when I applied for PhD, I got admissions from almost every single place I applied. So UC Berkeley, MIT, um, CMU, all the top schools, Harvard, Princeton, or wherever I applied. I wanted to go to. I like the Bay Area, so I wanted to go to UC Berkeley actually, and I met a couple of professors, Jan Stroika, who did distributed systems, started this great company called Databricks, and then Anyscale. And Joe Hollerstein, at that time, he had just started a company called Trifacta.
Right.
I met them, and I wanted to actually move to UC Berkeley to do. And I had good collaboration with Joe Hollerstein actually, because Jeff Heer, who was my advisor at Stanford, he used to collaborate with Joe Hollerstein. But then they both were starting their own companies, so they were spending less time on the research focus at the school, and were more focused on some of the stuff that they were doing at Databricks and Trifacta, respectively. So where to go? So I looked around. I mean, and then I felt maybe MIT could be a good option because I had already spent time at Stanford. Berkeley, I could not find the professors that I wanted to work with, even though I had admission. Other options were Carnegie Mellon and MIT because those are all top-rated schools. So I ended up moving to MIT and working with Sam Madden and David Karger. Because and this is kind of interesting because David Karger was doing human computer interaction, very similar to what Scott Klummer was doing, my advisor at Stanford. And I also love systems. So I love building things. And Sam Madden basically ran the database group at MIT, or systems group at MIT. So I felt like maybe this co-advising situation would work really, really well.
Right.
So moved to MIT. And I told them that I have no interest in doing academia because at the end, whenever everybody who joins a PhD, they have ambitions to become a great professor, and which is kind of like unnatural because why would you come to PhD if you really don't like academia? And I had made it very, very clear to my advisors that the reason why I'm here is I just still don't know what I want to do. So this is a fail-safe environment. So I was honest with them, and they were totally fine. They said like, yeah, just come here, do cool stuff, and once you figure out what you want to do with your life, just do that. And I went to MIT, and so I did a bunch of different random hacky projects actually, rather than figuring out one research question and doing deep down research. So I built like 5 different research projects. So one was called VoiceX, which was kind of like voice communication in the rural area. And these are completely different projects. Second was MailX, because social was becoming a big thing, which is like how you can use the group mailing in a way that allows the social moderation and those kind of stuff. Because currently all these mailing lists were like people used to spam, and people were learning that if you can apply some kind of like social moderation the way Quora and those things work, would
Right.
that have different impact? Then I did another project called Confer, which is how people should meet each other in the business setting, like conferences. And that was widely used by a lot of conferences. So we, in fact, onboarded several thousands of researchers and students and people who used to join conferences. I think this is still working. This is still, MIT has kept it alive, that project. And the last one was this project called Data Hub. And the whole idea was how you can kind of like abstract this notion of databases and just create a single hub where you can connect any kind of data sources and build applications. And applications could be agnostic of underlying data models and all that.
Right.
And could be connected in real time. So these were the 4 projects, and I did all 4 of them in parallel. And Data Hub started getting a lot of traction in the sense that a lot of people wanted to build cool applications. So MIT in general, a lot of people from venture capital, they visit there and look at the cool projects. So there was this investor called Alex. I'm forgetting his last name. He was at Highland Capital at that point, Alex Taussig, and now he's at Lightspeed. So he told me that, hey, like, why don't you drop out? Like, this seems like very, very cool project. And I asked him like if he would fund me if I really dropped out. And he said, yeah, you drop out. This seems like a very good project. You will easily get funding. One lesson that I learned is don't trust things investors say, and in general. So I literally dropped out and went to him like, hey, I dropped out. Do you want to give me money? And he said, I have to talk to my partners. Wasn't that good? Although I was able to raise money and all that, but hopefully that tells you the story of like how this idea of like starting a company came from. So it's just Data Hub project that really started getting some traction. And then I went to my advisor and told them like, hey, I'm leaving. And I think there is one sentence that Sam Madden said, my advisor, and I think it's such a profound sentence. I mean, I still sort of like, that is still a reminder of the, whenever I feel confused. And he said, you can stay at MIT, finish your PhD, write some research paper, get a great faculty job. I'll be proud. Or you can leave today, go build a company, make it very successful. I'll be equally proud. Just don't do something shit. So, and then he signed my paperwork. So that's the story of leaving MIT.
Yeah, that's a really good quote. That's great compass to have in your pocket. I'm curious, how do you remember kind of your beliefs and maybe assumptions about being a founder at the time, right? Because you still had spent a lot of time in research on campuses, like the really great ones. But hadn't like worked in a startup. You didn't have like a CEO founder role model. What did you remember at the time? Like, what was the assumption going in about how this would work? Did you look for co-founders? Like, how did you think about the act of starting a company and kind of validating your unique idea?
So I think my answers would be, something which is not going to be very helpful to a lot of people, because I really didn't know. I mean, the reality was that I just felt it's a cool project. That's the only thing I knew, and I really did not know who will use it, why they will use it, where to make money from. And so when I talked to these VCs, so Matej Jaharia, who is the CTO of Databricks, had just become a faculty at MIT. And I asked him, Matej, like, it seems like Databricks just got funded by NEA and Andreessen. So can you make intro? And Matej made the intro with Peter Levine from Andreessen and Pete Soncini from NEA. And they both wanted to do a deal. And at that time, Andreessen had this philosophy, and I think they still have, is that they will not invest in a company if that has a conflict of interest with one of their existing portfolio company. So he wanted to do the deal, but one of their existing companies said that they have conflict with Instabase. And so Andreessen pulled the offer with a lot of humility and respect, and because of the policy. And Pete Soncini connected me with Jerry Chen from Greylock, and Pete and Jerry together did the seed round. We really didn't know at that time. The pitch was that we wanted to create this operating system for data where people can build applications. And what applications, who will use it. I really have no idea how they ended up deciding the investing. Also, this was kind of like funny and bizarre story. At PhD, you don't make much money. So like I dropped out with very little money, like $4,000, $5,000 of saving. And I got sued for some old car accident that I had, and I had to settle that lawsuit for $4,500. So literally, I had $0 in my bank balance. So I stayed at a friend's house, and they'll take his bike and take the Caltrain to meet the investors in Sandhill, because that's where all the investors used to be during that time. So Citi was still a new phenomena, but most investors' headquarters used to be on Sandhill. And so Pete and I had a good meeting, and he said, most important meeting that is for you is going to be Forrest Basket because he's our technical person, and he is going to evaluate Instabase. I'm like, sure. And the meeting was supposed to be 4 to 5 p.m. On I think Wednesday or Thursday. So I took Caltrain, got out at 3 and realized that the tire of the bike was punctured. And now this is a friend's bike, so we can't leave it anywhere.
Right.
And so I basically decided to walk the bike, and really I reached 45 minutes late for the meeting. So the meeting was supposed to be 4 to 5, and I didn't have money to you could basically only option would have been Uber or Lyft or something, but I might not have had the account set up during that time. So we basically reached for the meeting, and I reached for the meeting 4:45, and 45 minutes late. But Forrest was still walking in the office. So I asked him, like, hey, do you have another hour so that we can actually chat? He said, no, I have another meeting starting in 12 minutes. I was very sweaty, but still we chatted, and we discussed only for like 7 to 8 minutes, and he still decided to move forward, which was super, super nice of him. So basically, NEA and Greylock did the deal with literally no idea who will use it and how they will use it.
What was your the technical insight at the time? Like, what was the answer to how is this going to work that you are uniquely capable of building a solution for, even if we don't know exactly who will be the customer or what exactly will be the product. I'm curious, what was it you felt like you understood at the time that maybe the big existing incumbent companies in the space were just not approaching the right way?
I don't know. I think sometime you just get lucky. So and I think it was that case, because the pitch was literally the way Windows or Mac operating systems sort of abstracted all of the complexity of the underlying details of like how microprocessors work and other things, and
Right.
just give you an application layer and people can build applications, and gives you the simplicity. That's, I think, what we need in data. We don't need like 2,000 different tools. So we want
Right.
to be that operating system layer where people can build these stuff. So which will make applications completely portable. That basically means you don't have to worry about, like, currently, like, if you have to, let's say you built a really good MapReduce program, if you want to apply somewhere else, you have to really replicate all of the underlying architecture and the schema and information models and everything. And we felt this is very, very tightly coupled system. And we need this layer called the operating system layer, which is going to decouple the application from the underlying, like, the storage and schema, information models and those kind of things. And I don't know if there is any deep insight in that. So that, like, anybody understands that, physical and logical independence of the storage layer from the application is a good thing.
Right.
But maybe, I think sometimes if you've studied at MIT and you say something, people find it more profound than it really is. So I think that was the case. So maybe like investors felt that whatever I was talking about is more profound than it really was. But the reality is, no, I don't think I had understood anything more than what other people had understood. But I just think that initially a lot of people take bet on person, and I was very clear, like, I don't have any customers, I really don't know. Here is what I built. I believe a lot of people want to use it. They can build applications. They love building applications on it. I have not written a single line of code. Everything is MIT research project, and we'll go and do it. And I think people believe in that. So maybe I got lucky because I know a lot of my friends who are much smarter than me and have built out a lot more, sometimes get scrutinized a lot more than I got scrutinized during that time. So CDRAM was literally super, super, super easy. Like, there is a blog written by NEA, I think, which is like, they asked like what this guy is doing. Nobody understands it. Just like, and somebody said, like, he says he wants to build this like sort of the operating system for the internet where you can just connect any data and anybody can build applications and you can port around. So the reality is, I don't think there was anything profound there. It's just some idea that looked very grand.
Right. Well, okay, so you have a seed round for your grand idea. Now you can at least, not be broke anymore. You can start building a team, building a product. What were the first 6 months like?
So Yeah. So it wasn't as sort of yeah luxurious as you think. It would have been because you raise money. So I raised money, and then I was in the student visa, and that
Right.
basically means you have to get some work visa to be able to do the work. So it gives you like I think 3 months right before you figure out the visa situation, and there is something called OPT, like optional practical training or something, but that you get only if you finish your degree. You don't get that if you don't finish your degree. And I did not finish my degree. So that was the catch. So I applied for H-1B and it got rejected. So I got a notice to leave the country. And so now you have all this money and you cannot work. And that was, and the reason why it got rejected was because you need this like employer-employee relationship for the
Right.
work visa. And now you cannot employ yourself because otherwise anybody can start a company and then can employ
Right.
themselves. So at that time, MIT came to my rescue, and I think my advisor admitted me back while we had the legal team figure out the situation. And it took about 2 years to figure out that situation. We had to go through a number of back and forth legal procedures, and eventually I got H-1B. And my advisor basically got me admitted back at MIT and kept me on student visa while I was working for the company for the next, like, I think, a year or two. So MIT basically saved me from getting deported. I don't know if it's legal or not, but they actually went out of the way to help me. And there was only one person, just me. There was no co-founder, and investors are like, "This is like 4 months. The guy has raised money. Like, didn't have any person. Like, what is he doing?" And I took time. I took a lot of time. So I started meeting a bunch of people, and then I found a person from Google who I really liked. We worked for 2 to 3 days, and we hired him. That was around November, end of November of 2015, as the first employee. And our first set of use cases were basically, I don't know if you have seen the Jupyter notebook that people use for data science, which is
Yeah.
like literally notebook app making this work on our basically operating system. That particular app people liked, and I'll tell you why people liked it. One of the issue that I think all the universities had during that time was if you have to give homework on very large data sets, nobody can fit those stuff in laptop.
Right.
And there was no good way of like running this note, because you could run those notebook locally, but if you can't fit the data set, then you are in problem. So how do you give students basically a way to do this where they can still do these homeworks, but on large data sets? So they started putting this like massive, massive, I mean, super massive, but hundreds of gigabytes of data sets, like entire wiki dump,
Hmm.
and asking students to basically do this. And they were getting free compute. It was we losing money. So we gave basically a lot of students at Stanford and MIT and University of Chicago and Columbia doing this homework stuff. The dean of Stanford Engineering, Jennifer Widom, at that time, she decided to basically teach worldwide some of the classes at Stanford. And since she used Instabase for, I think, several years, like a couple, 2, 3 years. But we were losing money. Now students don't want to pay money, and this free notebook, free compute, and free storage and free database we were giving wasn't accruing to any benefit for the company. But we got some good number of users. We built something that people were using, so we were feeling good. So it was about like almost 1.5 years or so, and we figured out that it's hard to make money from this app. So this app is not the app that is going to make us money, even though people love to use it. So we built some other apps, like one of the app was called Refiner, that basically can take your log files and it can automatically convert that into structured tables so that you can do analysis and all that. We call that app called Refiner. So we used to just go and do the cool demo on whoever comes to Instabase will just literally go and show a cool demo. So one guy who was from this company called Genefits, they do HR and payroll. He was seeing the demo and he said, like, this log file is cool, but our problem is we get a bunch of these PDF from health insurance providers so that our people can pick the best health insurance plans. And
Right.
currently we have to manually put those things so that people can compare, because otherwise, like, nobody wants to read like 100-page PDF.
Right.
Can you do that? We're like, we don't deal with PDF and all that. But we are an operating system. We can add an app, just read PDF, convert it to text, and do the refiner. And we added that. And Genefits went through leadership change during that time, so we never closed a deal. And there was CEO change. Then we were doing the same demo and with a friend who used to work at Learning Club at that time. He's like, we have the similar problem when people apply for loan. They submit this like pay stubs and bank statements and 1040 and driver license and passport. How we could do that, right? Like we don't do OCR and those kind of things, but we are an operating system. We just assembled some open source stuff, put something up,
Right.
and we built a cool demo. And Lending Club also went through some CEO change during that time. So we were like, when we get close to deal, there is a CEO change. That's not good. So then at that time, Martin Casado, who had just joined Andreessen, he just visited and he saw a demo of the product, and he was very like somehow it was super impressed, and he said he wants to do Series A and at pretty high price. Like, sounds great. So he wanted to do Series A. Then somebody suggested like, hey, you already have an offer. Maybe you should talk to some more VCs. And then Peter Fender from Benchmark, he showed a lot of interest, and a bunch of other good funds, Founders Fund and others. So it became competitive, and then we got a pretty good deal. So we got a Series A. We still had and there were a couple of startups who were using like 2,000 a month or something. They were paying us. And at that time, during that process, Andreessen used to do EBC, and there was a company called Standard Chartered visiting them. And Martin told them, like, you should use Instabase. And then they called me at Singapore. We did some, proof of concept, and they were like, we're going to do a deal. And the product that they were trying to use earlier was IBM Watson. And the license fee that they were paying was something like 1.2 million a year. I'm like, that stuff doesn't work, and you were willing to pay 1.2 million a year. This stuff works, so you should be paying more. So we basically gave them a price of 1.5 million a year, and they actually said yes. So basically now we have this price of 1.5 million. A bunch of these startups are paying $2,000. I'm like, hey, look, the price has gone up to $1 million, and so those startups left us. So they said like, we can't afford it, and so in fact, like in Series A note, Frank Chen from Andreessen wrote a note, which is, this company that Martin wants to do had 3 customers before Series A. They have 0 after Series A. So, basically, this happened during the due diligence process, like after the term sheet, before the. But Martin still went ahead and did the deal. So that's basically what led to the product market fit. So in summary, the product market fit, now we got other banks who had similar problems, and then we started talking to them. But reality is, and I write that in detail in my Series B note to investors, that a lot of people think that we were smart and we came up with the idea. That wasn't true. The reality was we really didn't know what we were doing for a good period of time. However, I think there was one thing that was true, and that is, we always believed that we don't really need to be good at predicting the future as long as we remain curious and fearlessly experimental and engage with the world with the right mindset. And if we do that, the market will pull you towards the right product. It's just that you have to recognize that where it's pulling you. And if you can recognize it quickly, you can find product market fit.
Right. I mean, the fact that someone like Standard Chartered was willing to even work with a startup that didn't have any enterprise customers is a big signal for you that they really, really care about the problem.
Yeah. So I think the product market fit is like, I think just establishing if the problem is real, right? And I don't think you need to really have the best product at that point in time, and just engage with the world to really establish the problem is real. And then you can build good product. You have smart people, right? And we always attracted smart people in hiring. So that's how we found it, and I don't know if we still found it. I mean, still every sale is a grind. I mean, this is a reality. So, but then we of course got almost like 4 out of top 5 banks that are customers. Like if you know, like, and globally also almost like if you look at top 10 banks in the world, 8 of them are our customers. So generally, I think we got a pull, and we got all of these people started using the product.
Right.
But it wasn't like we didn't have product market fit. We really didn't come up with it. It's just that over the period after working with a number of people, we were able to sort of like understand what problem people are willing to pay money for, and we just doubled down on those. So not in profound answer. It's just really like it was I think brute force.
Right. And now you have made this staggering transition from like having a free, app marketplace that students and small startups are using directly to like Fortune 50, some of the most traditional, conservative, large institutions in the world. Like, how did you approach like even learning like what is the right like go to market motion? How do you kind of shape a sales process? Who's the right buyer? How to even like forecast how things are going to shape up for you after 2017 when you're focused on really large companies? Could you share more about that?
Yeah, the reality is that we've made a ton of mistakes. So we can tell you all the things not to do. I think that we know more than all the things that you should do. So,
Yes, please.
2017, we had no customers when we did the Andreessen one. Then we started working with Andreessen with the senior shot, and we closed the deal, I think, in 2018, early 2018. It took about 6 to 8 months, large
Right.
enterprise deal. And after that, we got some really, really good customers, like some, names that are the beacon of financial industries. So I will not take the name, but just think of like one of the top 2, 3 banks, and we got in pretty quick succession. After Standard Chartered, we got like 3 more banks within the same year.
And who were your champions in these banks?
I'll just go and Andreessen will make the intro. We'll just go do the demo, and then so I was the only person. The company was literally 4-person company when Andreessen invested the Series A. And in 2018, we were like 8, 9-person company, really like, and ended with like something like 20 because we wanted some people to help with customer support and customer management and those kind of things. So literally, like, Andreessen used to do a lot of EBC. They're just investors that they wanted to show that they can provide value. So they would make a ton of intro. And we will go and talk to a bunch of those people. And then literally, like, early on, Brad Kern, who runs the Andreessen EBC in New York, he will go with me to the customer, like,
Got it.
holding, basically actually carrying bag. So he was my salesperson for some period of time. I still tell him now he's a COO or something. But 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 basically and that basically gave us an illusion, actually, an illusion in the sense that the company has grown from this 6,000 revenue to like 4.5 million in a single year. I mean, that's like a very staggering growth. So 4.8 or $5 million was the revenue, I think, early 2019. And Sarah Cannon from Index came, and I think I didn't want to raise the money, but it's like, if somebody pays $1 billion, maybe we can talk. And Index said, yeah, let's chat. And I think I don't think it was a mistake because it helped, and I'm I have a profound respect for Sarah Cannon because she took that bet on us, and that has saved the company. And I think that actually we raised the money of Series B in 2019. I think we announced in July 2019. Was around $105 million at $1 billion valuation. We were about 20% company at that point, no salesperson, just all engineers. And there were like 4 or 5 people in, like, we call that a leverage team, which is like can talk to the customer and all that. And then we hit a roadblock because we didn't know how to scale sales. And typically, like, when some investors put so much money, you have the pressure of building the sales team quickly. So, the typical suggestion that somebody would give you is go and hire a CRO, and they will go and build a team. And in general, like, I think you have to ask the question, is the company ready for CRO? So we hired a CRO. And, CRO typically also, want to show that they're great. So they're like, they gave the forecast for the year 2020 as $20 million, and the person joins around November and December of 2019. And it is around like March and April, and like, the person has not hired anyone. How are we going to hit 20 million? Because just assume, right, everyone has a quota of 1.5. So 20 divided by 1.5 is something around like, $14 million. And if you take 6 months of ramp time, I mean, the point is it's just not going to work, right? Like, the metric process, the capacity-based model. So it became very clear that we have made a wrong hire. So we decided to part ways. And then basically we started building the smaller like VP level hires. So we hired Luke Rogers from AppDynamics around I think July of 2020. So that year was a brutal year. I mean, literally we went from like 4.5 or 5 to 7 million. And it's expected, right? Because now all of my focus was hiring and building team, and I could not
Right.
do sales. And earlier I was the one who was doing the sales. So that year
Right.
was basically completely lost year. And of course, like after that, we built the team, and in 2021, we went from 7 to 21, and then we doubled again after that. But we made the mistake that, and the key point I think is that we should not have raised at that high price, right? Like given that we had not built a team, but the CEO, I mean, if somebody's giving you some, such a high price, I mean, like it's very, it's very lucrative, and it's very like tempting to go and do it. In our case, it turned out to be all good, and I think, in fact, I'm happy that we raised that money because it allowed us to really go and make mistakes and build that.
Right.
But
You had a lot
generally,
of buffer and runway during a
yeah,
period where the market was very constrained in terms
yeah,
of
yeah,
fundraising.
yeah. Actually, yeah. I mean, basically, during COVID, I mean, when market had like we had like 7 years of runway because
Right.
our team size is very small. We were only like 30% company, so
Right.
so that definitely helped. And we were still making 5 million. So if you have 30, in fact, like we were cash flow positive overall until like mid of 2020. Because the key point
Right.
is we were still making $5 million a year, and we had
Right.
only like 15% company. So like we were not spending a lot. But the key
Right.
point is
Right.
we also did not grow. We grow from 5 to 7. Then after, of course, we triple and then double. But like I think we did not know, and we made a ton of mistakes. And eventually, I think we learned the lessons. So I don't think there is. It's sales is don't take it for granted. You have to actually build it and build it with a lot of logic, with a lot of reasoning, with a lot of
Right.
measurement. If you don't do that, you will burn a lot of money. And we have basically made just so many mistakes in sales. Yeah, we like the amount of wastage that we have done in terms of the gas to build a sales team is pretty mind blowing.
Right. Well, that's why you need the venture capital funding.
Yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, you cannot.
yeah,
uh, I'm curious. You all have always looked at kind of multiple ML approaches, right? That's always
yeah,
been kind of your secret sauce. Is you're not stuck with like, oh, we do one thing well. It's more, we enable you to like choose whatever approach you need for your problem and workflow. When did you first kind of start looking at incorporating LLMs as one of these approaches? And what was the reaction from your very traditional customer base? Were they, resistant to the idea, excited about it? Could you kind of help us understand what the enterprise adoption at that level of this new technology looked like?
yeah. So I think like we had the operating system, so that was the advantage. So we had built our own distributed operating system. That basically means
Right,
we could add and remove things pretty easily. Like OS can
right,
add and remove things without changing, the on the up. So this basic idea that we suggested earlier, the portable applications, because all the changes you can make in the operating system, turned out to be very, very helpful to us. So in fact, earlier we were against ML because ML did not work reliably for these unstructured data problems, right? Like, and in fact, in a customer meeting, somebody said, "So, do you use ML?" I'm like, "Do you need ML or solution to your problem?" And then there was
right,
silence in the room. But this things changed around late 2018 when the Transformer paper came. Uh, the attention is all you need. And I think there were some early language models, not LLM, but smaller language models. I think BERT and GPT-1, GPT-2, some of those models came. Transformer architecture really changed how do we approach these language problems. And at that time, there was a board meeting, and I sent a note to the board, and I think, and that was widely contested at that time. And we said that we have something like that, which is at Istabase, we have determined that deep learning is the future of language understanding. We are going to invest fully in that. And the question is not about whether this approach will work or not. We have determined that we will invest everything to make this approach work. And and we wrote our own language model. The problem with the sequence-based language models was they basically represent our, language a sequence of tokens and produce new tokens, but it not work well on documents because let's say you're looking at a pay stub, then the rows and columns are become very, very important. So
Right.
we came up with this idea of like how you can encode the layout, the x and y coordinate in those language models. So we did a lot of good work in layout aware language models, where you basically also have the spatial representation. So you encode geometry in the language itself, and that
Right.
document is basically geometry becomes very, very important, because if you don't understand geometry, this is jumbled set of words and that they might not mean anything, because documents use a vision and language both together, and that's why
Right.
geometry becomes very, very important.
Right.
So we basically wrote that, and we moved to the language model called InstaLM. And the problem is, in order to that was the foundation model that could be fine tuned on any given problem by just taking 100 samples or something. So it could run on CPU, but in order to fine tune it, you needed GPUs. And one of the big struggle that we had was many of the customers don't have GPUs. They didn't know like how to operate GPUs.
Right.
And earlier, our core proposition was you can run anywhere on-prem because it's an operating system. As long as we can run, containers and Kubernetes, we should be all good. So we struggled at some places, but we had still, sometimes you just make a call that like, look, we are going to go in that direction. We will invest in the rising sun, not the setting sun. So
Right.
certain customers that were not ready, we were like, move to the cloud or just do training on the cloud. You can still run those things on-prem. And that worked out okay in most cases. Some customers still struggled, but in that case, we will basically try to, get some sort of synthetic data outside and train a model on using GPUs on the cloud, and then run that model on-prem. And that worked reasonably well.
Got it.
And you can still like in one, it's just that something that will take an hour to train on GPU, it will take a few days on CPUs. In the worst case, like, you can still run on CPU. It's just that the order of cost just basically goes significantly up. Now, so this worked great until like early 2022, and that's when the large language models, so people basically started building language models that are much, much, much larger. A very good friend of mine is Ilya, who is co-founder of OpenAI, and perhaps one of the most influential figure in everything that you have seen in the LLM space, GPT-3, ChatGPT, and all that. And we were just chatting, and I'm like, let me experiment with some of the stuff that he is doing. And so we started encoding layout on large language models, and we saw great results without fine tuning. And I said, like, but like, customers aren't like sending data outside. These are going to be very, very problematic sort of endeavor. So I talked to him and he said, let's talk about some partnership and we can figure out how to make this work. And that's when, he connected me with the partnership team of OpenAI, and we figured out like how to get access to their model so that no data is ever retained. They cannot learn from it, and all of the legal stuff that we needed to get done. And so we were doing the experiments most of the 2022, and once the results came good, we decided to now take a very clear stand that, and it's a controversial stand because I think there is just a lot of cool stuff that's happening in the open source community, that a fewer large language models will dominate rather than having multiple fine-tuned stuff. In fact, we wrote that fine-tuning is not going to be the future, and companies that will invest in like community of like, large number of smaller models may not be the future. And that's where we basically fully invested on AI Hub. And AI Hub basically had some controversial bets, and I hope those turn out to be true, but we encoded those things, and the key idea here is now given the AI Hub is publicly available, anybody can go and play with it. Now you can open it for third party the third party developers and all that. And I think you talked about this question of, so some of the core questions that basically came, which we kind of like addressed about data privacy and security. But then there was another question of trust and hallucination, right? Like with LLMs. And how do you make that work? So we did a lot of work, and I'm not, because of the IP constraints, I cannot give you everything, but like I'll give you the high level. So we did a ton of work on fixing hallucination, and I'll give you the rationale, how we approach it. A lot of people believe that hallucination is because these large language models sometimes don't know how to reason things well. Our experiments suggest that is not the reason. just think of what these large language models are. They encode two things. One is they learn how to reason about the world. Second, they compress all of the knowledge that exists in the world into that neural network, because that's how they're able to give you the answer. I believe that this compression is very lossy. That means when you
Right.
compress all of the knowledge in the world, you lose many of the relationships. It's like Google Index, right? It compresses all of the knowledge in the world, but you only have the, which document contains what words and what order,
Right.
kind of like you lose a lot of other information. So this is so compression in many cases are lossy, right? It's very, very hard to find lossless compression. So what if like you don't compress things? It's not possible for the internet, but let's say I'm working on a folder of documents, or let's say somebody applied for a loan that submitted like 20 documents. What if on the fly you can create embedding and the representation of that knowledge, which is uncompressed, right? Like, because
Right.
now that is just created. It's kind of like, and then reason on that uncompressed representation. And if you do that, you will not get that. So you're bounding the knowledge to be only that.
Right.
And you will not get the hallucination problem. So and I was surprised kind of use cases that people have figured out. So I was in India and was talking to some press, and there was this guy who does this mental health counseling, and he says, he looked at ChatGPT, he was very excited, and then he wanted to expose some of those things as a conversational app on phone for his customers, where they can talk about mental, health, and they can get the right advice. But he said, I have no control over what answer ChatGPT is going to give. And that's not what I want. I've written this 15 books and, last 10 years of notes. I want everything to come from that and nothing outside that. And that's where, like, an Instabase, you can do that, right? Now you basically created the representation of those embeddings and the knowledge that it just based on that data set. And if you basically force that the reasoning cannot go beyond that bounded representation, you will not hallucinate. Now, how do you do that? It's a hard problem, so I'll not get into the technical details.
Yeah, makes sense.
But there is a way to. So I think the hallucination problem would continue to exist when you are looking at the knowledge, basically sort of the entire internet. But there is a way to address hallucination when you bound the domain to something a lot more controlled.
Awesome. This is such a great journey of like product evolution and maturation. I'm curious what your advice would be for early stage founders just getting started in AI right now. You know that vast majority of new companies being started are exploring how to leverage this big platform shift and all the new tech that has come out in the last couple of years. So I'm curious, what would be your advice to someone new getting started right now?
I mean, my advice has always been the same, which is like, don't spend too much time predicting the future. And I think just do what you feel is what you like exploring. Just go and do it, and we'll figure out something. In general, I think just be curious, be experimental, and I think engage with the world where you can understand and recognize what problems are real and what feedback you are getting, and quickly be able to react to it. I think that leads, and this is just a meta answer rather than actual answer, but I think that applies much more than really, like, nobody really knows like, if somebody really knew like how to create a startup, they can create this factory, right? Like, so the reality actually is that it's just that engage with the world with a point of view that you don't know everything, and recognize the feedback to really establish which problems are real, and double down on that. And I think that works. That works in most cases.
Well, thank you so much, Anant, for joining us today and all your candor. I think it will be an incredibly helpful story for founders to listen to, because so many of them are exactly in the shoes you were in 2015 and trying to figure out, should I keep going? Should I stop? And, which direction? So, yeah, I think this is just really amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Oh, thank you so much. That was great.
You've been listening to the Startup Field Guide with Sandhya, an Unusual Ventures podcast. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you liked what you heard, please rate our show and help us reach more aspiring founders with lessons on how to find product market fit. Thanks for listening. Until next time.